The investigation, mapping the hidden machine. To understand why the field drew circles where it did, we had to stack every scrap of data on one table. Reyes met the retired cable engineer in a diner with bad coffee and better privacy. Between them, trench bathymetry, hydrophone logs, cable error heat maps, and a grad student's spreadsheet of silence windows. On a fresh chart, they layered patrol arcs, ingress nodes, and null wedges. The mess turned into geometry. What nobody knew at the time was that the fields didn't float alone. They nested. A broad, low-amplitude quieting would sweep first, like a broom. Inside it, a tighter acoustic velvet, the null. Within that, a razor-thin line where tone events showed up on passive gear, the do not enter, that nobody could decode. Layered fields, synchronized like a machine booting up, and always oriented to trench mouths and shelf breaks. It wasn't random. It was a grid hugging geology. Reyes didn't say base. He said system. The engineer nodded and traced finger arcs along fracture zones. Trenches aren't just deep, they're structural, pressure vessels, waveguides, natural ducts. If you could modulate boundary conditions, temperature microgradients, microbubble concentration, the slip of the boundary layer, you could steer sound, shape drag, and hide motion in plain hearing. That was the working theory. Not a building in the dark, but a distributed machine embedded in walls we thought were rock and water. Reyes is a composite of seasoned analysts, credible processes, anonymized identities. But there was one problem: physics. The 550-knot slope still sneered at drag. Cavitation should have howled. Supercavitation would have been loud and dirty, a rocket plume screaming under the sea. The track was clean. We frame it as recorded, not proven, anomalous in the strict sense, observed, repeatable in pattern, and incompatible with known mechanisms. So the team stacked known tricks against the data. Non-cavitating displacement through bubble phase control, microbubble injection ahead of a hull to alter compressibility without a collapsing wake. Boundary layer manipulation, keeping flow attached through smart surfaces or field effects we don't have. If something could keep water from tearing itself apart, speed becomes a question of power and control, not noise and ruin. Competing explanations tried to retake ground. Volcanic microseisms? Predictable, broadband, and not fond of straight edges. Gas plumes? They ride up, they don't cruise corridors and schedule windows. Internal waves? They bend sound, yes, but they don't anticipate ships and open like curtains. The periodicity beat them all. A cadence that matched no tide table, no storm train, no cable maintenance schedule. The shape and time betrayed an operator. Meanwhile, something else was happening in the records. At the edges of null events, passive arrays caught stepped narrowband tones that changed when ships altered course. A lab ran a spectral decomposition and found quantized intervals. Too clean for biology, too nimble for shipping harmonics. The tone appeared, shifted, vanished, then returned at a new step just before a corridor opened. If that was noise, it was a very considerate kind. The mapping moved from walls to gates. Ingress nodes hugged canyon heads like hinges. Egress points preferred shelf saddles that led to cable trunks or naval lanes. Between them, arcs traced along isobaths, the lines of equal depth, where subthermoclines run strongest. The system used the ocean's own architecture. You don't build a door in a wall of water. You borrow the wall and make it articulate. And once you move through it once, you can't unlearn the fact that your ship is obeying a rule you didn't write. Here's where the weird got useful. The retired engineer, who'd spent years fixing maddening throughput dips on transoceanic lines, opened a folder he never should have kept. Private noise maps, drawn from diagnostic pings he wasn't supposed to archive, showed rolling occlusions that marched with the same tempo as nulls. On top of that, he had a 90s-era overlay, hand-drawn squares moving month to month near trench heads. He slid it over Reyes' arc map. Perfect overlay. Different decades. Same choreography. A field team took the hint and ran a legal experiment. They parked a passive buoy field across a suspected ingress near Tonga. 3 listening points, no pinging, just ears. On a predicted window, the floor noise dipped 5 minutes early, then a narrowband step appeared. 90 seconds later, a Doppler ghost crossed all 3 stations with no cavitation signature, phase-locked in a way that screamed mechanical. For minutes after, the tone stepped up and held until the noise floor returned. A door opening, a thing passing, a door closing. No police sirens, no fireworks. Just procedure. In the lab, someone finally said it out loud. The machine is distributed, not central. Trench walls as emitters, shelf breaks as shapers, fracture zones as ducts. The base isn't a bunker, it's a field of influence that can harden and soften the ocean itself. You can't bomb geometry. You can only navigate it. Meanwhile, skepticism held the room by the lapels. Could the tones be shipping harmonics? They ran cross-correlation against AIS logs. The steps didn't match prop blade rates or generator fundamentals. Could the Doppler ghost be a layered current artifact? They ran glider data on current profiles. The drift would smear, not hinge. Could the null be climate-driven stratification weirdness? The wedge moved against wind and held edges too straight for weather. A single detail returned like a fingerprint, pre-event quieting. Before any pass, the sea shushed itself across a footprint that matched the corridor geometry. Then the system acted. That order of operations, prepare, pass, release, was the hinge the whole map turned on. Preparation implies anticipation. Anticipation implies awareness. Uncomfortable words when you're trained to see water as medium, not mind. By the time the stacks of overlays filled the table, nobody in that diner cared about labels. Base, system, grid, pick your term. The pattern behaved like a machine run by intent. It shaped where we could sense, where we could move, and when we were allowed through. You don't get that from geology. You get that from operators. And somewhere inside those corridors, something moved fast without leaving a scream. Whistleblower files, careers broken, data intact. The first file came in a manila envelope that smelled like a maintenance bay, oil and dust. Reyes sealed complaint. Not a rant. A checklist. Chain of custody screenshots. Timestamps. A note in the margin about a missing reel-to-reel segment from an archive transfer. 38 minutes scrubbed from a Cold War tape that should have been routine. He'd flagged the 550-knot slope, the synchronized null, and the printout that had vanished during patching. He didn't accuse. He documented. The signature block was wet ink, the way people sign when they expect to be ignored. There's a precedent for this kind of paper getting buried, and the person attached to it getting tested. The polygraph line always shows up here, and it's messy. Polygraphs aren't truth machines, but in case after case on this channel, when technical anomalies meet institutional discomfort, consistent charts appear. No deception spikes on core claims, wobbles on peripheral memory, steady breath rate when they describe the part that costs a career. Correlation isn't causation. Still, patterns matter when the facts sit under lock. The second witness didn't speak in acronyms. He was a merchant captain, 40 years afloat, the kind of man who times coffee by the swell. He logged a cold burn after riding the lip of a luminous upwelling near the Puerto Rico line. The glow rose like a dome without breaking the surface. His deckhand touched a rail and yanked his hand back like it was hot, but the steel read cool. By midnight, 2 men carried red, map-like rashes on forearms and neck. The clinic wrote dermatitis. The captain wrote, "We crossed something." He sent his log to an address he found in an old maritime safety circular. No response. Months later, his insurer raised his premium for routes that clipped the trench. Environmental risk, the letter said. The third witness piloted an ROV for a private survey firm hired to inspect a cable saddle near a known occlusion. He wasn't supposed to keep personal copies, but pilots always keep a frame or two. That day, his feed glitched the second the vehicle slid into the canyon mouth. The clock on the footage desynced by 37 seconds from the topside recorder, then drifted back. His digital compass spun, one clean rotation, and steadied like nothing happened. The seabed in those 37 seconds carried a phantom shimmer, not light and not current, just a phase shift that made sand look like skin. The office reviewed the tape and called the glitch harmless latency. He archived a backup anyway. 6 months later, an audit cleared his desk. He took the drive home and stopped answering calls. The files came braided with bureaucratic thorns. A procurement line item appeared in a budget after null events spiked. Oceanic resilience. It paid for hardware that never got named, field expedient arrays, portable shelters for temporary impairments, contractor NDAs with language nobody had seen in maritime work, transmedium contingencies, non-cooperative environment. Put those phrases next to the silence windows, and you didn't get proof, you got a posture. Someone was preparing for a sea that wouldn't behave. Meanwhile, a private lab with an old dosimeter charted a small spike inside null zones. Not radiation, they insisted. A meter reading grumpy in a field the instrument didn't like. They mailed their graph to a Navy liaison tied to environmental acoustics. 3 weeks later, their lease was pulled. The landlord cited renovations. The lab packed and left their buoy moorings for someone else to collect. On the boat, a grad tech snapped a photo of the dosimeter needle arcing during a tone event. It's blurry. You can still see the jump. Whistleblowers don't agree on everything. Reyes held to non-ballistic Transmedium. The captain talked about a presence like weather. The ROV pilot swore by his compass wheel and the feeling that the canyon walls weren't walls when the field breathed. What tied them together wasn't a theory, it was the cost. Reassignment, premium hikes, audits, wellness checks at odd hours by men who didn't leave cards. Careers stalled not by scandal, but by silence. And then came the line that made Reyes' file feel like a fuse. His complaint referenced a missing reel-to-reel segment from a 197 SOSUS transfer. The exact time window a retired analyst once dubbed the fast mover, epic, when arrays caught 200-knot ghosts that never made it into open literature. The gap was 38 minutes long. The annotated log for that hour had a pencil mark, training artifact. The overlay from the retired cable engineer put an occlusion square over the same trench head for the same night. A coincidence that did too much work. Here's where a precedent helps keep the floor solid. We've seen sealed complaints survive even when their authors don't. We've seen audit trails mapped to maintenance windows that cover deletions. We've seen polygraphs, weaponized and then ignored when they come back clean. Nothing in these files proves a base. Everything in them makes accident look lazy. A fourth voice barely qualified as a witness, more like a warning. A yacht owner with a hobbyist's passive rig tried to duplicate a tone shift near a corridor edge. He got a pattern. 2 months later, a defense contractor bought his recording hardware at a generous price. The logs vanished from his blog. The yacht's AIS track, archived by a third party, shows him tracing the arc and then stopping short, drifting, and heading home at half speed. He told a friend he'd felt a heavy quiet, then sold the boat. The composite that emerges isn't dramatic. It's procedural. People notice. People file. Systems respond, not with answers, but with redirects. The data, trimmed and redacted, still lines up. Chain of custody screenshots. Clock desyncs. Invisible burns. Tone steps that anticipate a turn. A missing 38 minutes that matches a moving black square. You don't need a confession when the paperwork rhymes. The lab with the dosimeter had one last entry in a folder named null_days. A hand-scrawled note. Spike only when the ocean goes soft. Weeks later, the landlord's notice hit their inbox. Data intact. Careers bent. And the machine kept its schedule. The Puerto Rico Trench incident. Human-level harm. It was supposed to be a clean transect. A research vessel chartered by a consortium of universities, running passive recorders along the trench shoulder at dusk. No pinging, no provocation. They motored east-northeast, hugging an isobath that our overlays later marked as the lip of an ingress corridor. The captain had the brief: avoid active sonar, maintain steady speed, log everything. On deck, grad students taped foam around Pelican cases and joked about seasickness, the kind of normal banner that keeps fear small. Below, a tech checked the magnetometer feed and sipped bad coffee, unaware that the next 4 minutes would teach his body to obey a tone. At 1942, the ship's lights flickered. Not a full blackout. A dip, like the room inhaled. The EM monitor logged a surge that didn't match their generator cycle. The captain double-checked the panel and found nothing wrong. Then the ocean went quiet. Not to the ear, the sea still hissed, but on the recorders the band fell flat. The acoustic spectrum turned to a soft plank. No shrimp crackle, no distant prop throb, no surface chop. A velvet return without a ping. Human bodies reacted before anyone named it. One deckhand leaned on the rail and swallowed hard. The medic later wrote, nausea onset within 30 seconds, no vertigo, pupils normal. Another crew member rubbed his forearms and said his skin felt sunburned in the shade. A third stared at his hands and flexed them like the fingers weren't sure they belonged. The lab lead said, keep rolling. The captain nodded and held course. At 1944, a tone arrived, low, modulated, stepped like a ladder you can't see. You don't notice a sound like that unless you're looking for it. It sits under everything, below the hum of the world, a floorboard creak in a cathedral. On the spectrogram, it drew a clean rail at narrowband, then shifted up half a step when the helmsman corrected 2 degrees to port. That correction wasn't ordered. He'd felt a pull he couldn't name and nudged to counter it. The tone answered like it had heard him think. The medic's log grew a second page in 5 minutes. 3 crew reported metallic taste, copper, they said. 1 had a rash that mapped like spilled ink across the neck and collarbone. The ship rolled on water that wasn't rolling. Seams creaked. In the lab, the magnetometer hiccuped, a sharp deviation and return, like a compass flinching under a hidden hand. GPS showed a fractional drift, then corrected timestamps clean, until later, when they weren't. 4 minutes and 12 seconds, the passive recorders wrote silent slabs with a single line threading through. The tone, stepping, anticipating, then holding. On the deck, the deckhand who'd swallowed hard folded to a knee and took slow breaths like he'd learned to listen to himself fast. The medic put a palm on his back and felt muscle quiver, not from fear. The lab lead asked the captain if they should break off. The captain said, 15 more seconds. He watched a clock he kept in his head and thought about insurance letters he'd read that week. Then the field released. There's no other word that fits. The noise floor rose like a crowd returning to a stadium. Shrimp crackle. Surface hiss. A ship's distant heartbeat miles away. The tone stayed for a beat, stepped down and left. The medic checked pupils again and wrote, normalizing. The rash didn't fade. The taste lingered in 2 mouths, gone from the 3rd. The helmsman stared at nothing for a second, then blinked like he'd been underwater and remembered air. The data dump that night looked like a glitch until you align clocks. The magnetometer. Spike matched the acoustic blanking onset to the second. The EM surge preceded both by a hair's breadth, like a starter gun. The acoustic blanking ended, and the magnetometer shivered again. In that gap, the black box mic, wired to catch bridge chatter and incidental sound, caught the tone that the ear could barely hold. Low, modulated, clean. If you boost it, it sounds like language without vowels, a steady climb and rest that tells you nothing and everything. You're in a system. Medical ambiguity made everyone comfortable and nobody safe. Radiation? No ionizing signature. The dosimeters read boring. UV? At night, under cloud. Allergic reaction? 3 people, 2 stations, same window. Anxiety? Maybe. But anxiety doesn't cluster around a 4-minute acoustic event that nobody saw because nobody could see the ocean go quiet. The clinic ashore called the rashes dermatitis and wrote, likely stress, for the nausea. The crew member with the worst symptoms resigned 2 weeks later and stopped answering emails. His NDA arrived in a standard envelope with a friendly cover letter about safety protocols. If a tone can bend the behavior of trained crews, it can bend yours on a ferry at dusk. The insurer did what insurers do. They flagged the transit with a code that looks bland until you read the actuarial notes. Environmental anomaly. Premiums for future work near the trench rose by a tidy percentage. The consortium's budget absorbed it and moved on. The Port Authority shrugged at the Anomaly report. Their logs showed no incident, no obstruction, no reason to care. The Navy liaison, copied on the data package, acknowledged receipt and recommended equipment calibration review. The tone file attached to the email didn't bounce. It just never got referenced again. What nobody knew at the time was how the black box captured more than a sound. The clock on its file desynced by 37 seconds during the blank, then gently drifted back to network time over the next hour. The ROV pilot's compass spin had a cousin on that night, time itself wobbling, instruments not lying so much as being told a different story for 4 minutes and change. The crew joked about the Bermuda Triangle and didn't laugh. Human-level harm sounds dramatic. It wasn't. It was incremental, impersonal, like a system brushing past a person and leaving a bruise without meaning to. The ocean didn't rage. It curated. It made a corridor, opened it, held a distance, spoke in a tone that wasn't for us, and let us pass after letting us know we were allowed. In the debrief, the lab lead circled a sentence. Symptom onset synchronized with acoustic blanking. The captain underlined it and didn't say out loud what everyone felt. If a door can open, it can close. If you can be waved through, you can be held outside. And if a tone can settle in your bones for 4 minutes, it can settle longer. The control signal, language or lock. After Puerto Rico, the tone stopped being a rumor.